the latest smear doing the rounds is that Zarah Sultana has turned on Jeremy Corbyn. That's a story that's being pushed by Dominic Penner of The Telegraph, who tweeted this. Your party co-leader, Zarah Sultana, has claimed that Jeremy Corbyn capitulated on anti-Semitism when he was leader of the Labour Party. Sultana said Corbyn capitulated on anti-Semitism. Interesting that. Well, shall we have a look at what she actually said? She said, I think we're in a very different political moment. We have had to build on the strengths of Corbynism, its energy, mass appeal, and bold policy platform. And we also have to recognise its limitations. He capitulated the IHRA definition of anti Semitism, which famously equates it with anti Zionism, and which even its lead author, Kenneth Stern, has now publicly criticised. It triangulated on Brexit, which alienated huge numbers of voters. It abandoned mandatory reselection of MPs for the trigger ballot compromise, keeping many of the party's undemocratic structures in place. It didn't make a real effort to channel its mass membership into the Labour movement or tenants' unions, which would have enriched the party's social base. When it came under attack from the state and the media, it should have fought back, recognising that these are our class enemies. But instead, it was frightened and far too conciliatory. This was a serious mistake. If we're contesting state power, we're going to face a major backlash, and we need to have the institutional resilience to withstand it. You cannot give these people an inch. That was with her interview with the New Left Review. But of course, in classic Telegraph fashion, they spun it into a soap opera of utter betrayal because, God forbid, we have a nuanced conversation about how anti-Semitism allegations were weaponized to break the left. We know as well that the smear campaign against Corbyn was one of the most vicious in modern British politics. Between the years of 2015 and 2019, thousands of articles tied his name to anti-Semitism. Yet, the data internally showed that fewer than 1% of members had any complaints at all, a fact confirmed even by the Equality and Human Rights Commission's own investigation. Now, none of us should be or are surprised that some have already come out and accused either Zarah or the left as being anti-Semites once again. This is what Paul Mason had to say. I called it the fiasco party, and I was right. Sultana's trying to ditch any commitment to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Why? Because she would have had to expel large numbers of her supporters. Mason here is just alluding to the idea that her supporters are anti-Semitic. It does get incredibly worse. This is what so-called journalist Oliver Cam wrote. Miss Sultana is evasive. She's an anti-Semite. Nothing new, eh? Yet Sultana is responding in the way many should have done all those years back, by giving approximately 0 fucks. The smears won't work this time. I say it loudly and proudly. I'm an anti-Zionist. Print that. God, she fucking kills it every time. Oh, that's what we need. And on the IHRA definition, Kenneth Stern, the guy who helped draft it, had said himself it was never meant to be used as a legal code or a weapon against political speech. He's warned repeatedly it chills debate on Israel-Palestine, silencing Jewish and Palestinian voices alike. So when Sultana says we shouldn't have capitulated, she's actually defending the principle of free debate, something the left should be leading on, not running from. So let's drop the melodrama. Dom, Zarah Sultana isn't turning on Corbyn. She's not an anti-Semite. She's defending him and defending the right to speak out against apartheid without being smeared as a racist. The only people desperate to frame this otherwise are the same ones who spent 5 years trying to crush Corbyn in the first place. Oh, Curtis, I bet you've got so much you want to say on this. This smear campaign surely isn't going to work this time, is it?
Oh, no, of course not. And Zarah Sultana said that herself in a tweet. It's not going to work. I mean, I was half expecting for the Board of Deputies to come out with a statement and say, Zarah Sultana is downplaying anti-Semitism again. First of all, let's go through the facts. I mean, she didn't say that Jeremy Corbyn capitulated on anti-Semitism. She said that he capitulated on the IHRA definitions of anti-Semitism. These are two different things. Now, in one of the definitions where there was sort of a back and forth and, they couldn't get an agreement on, which was that Israel is a racist endeavor. Now, of course, that definitely did not go through. There are many Zionists and pro-Israel people within the party who said, we cannot do that. Essentially saying that's very anti-Semitic. And the Labour Party bent over backwards for the feelings of Israel, but it completely ignored that there were Palestinian people who were inside the Labour Party. And there were Palestinian people who felt truly that Israel is a racist endeavor. And I happen to agree with that. I think Israel is a racist endeavor because it's trying to be, and sort of is already, an ethno-state. It's an ethno-state that's trying to colonize the entirety of the West Bank and Gaza. It wants to take over it all and wipe out Palestinians off the face of the earth. If that isn't a racist endeavor, I don't know what is. But even if you disagree with that, it's a huge issue with free speech, right? We should have robust democratic arguments and debates within political parties, especially one that swelled to the size of 600,000 members. So if you feel uncomfortable that people were saying that Israel was a racist endeavor, then just feel uncomfortable. But don't silence Palestinians who have obviously got family members who have been slaughtered. And this predates the 7th of October. And of course, that still happened. It's just accelerated and got worse now. They have family members over there. And yet we were silencing these Palestinian people by saying we couldn't say that Israel was a racist endeavor. There was a whole hoo-ha with the IHRA. Now, I get why Jeremy Corbyn sort of capitulated, because at the end of the day, this was at a time when it was an insurgent campaign, and we were talking about hostile takeovers earlier, right? It wasn't a hostile takeover, it was a democratic election. But obviously people understand that Jeremy Corbyn and the membership didn't have control of the Labour machine. You know, the Labour Party was owned and bought by the establishment, but very briefly between 2015 and 2019, there was kind of sparks of actually it was a member-led party. Not completely, but, you know, a little bit. So they were an insurgency campaign. And with an insurgency campaign fighting against a machine, you've got the machine fighting back against you every single day. And you had people like Margaret Hodge, for example, undermining the party. And of course, every single day there were splits, public splits and fights. It looked bad for the public. And Jeremy Corbyn and those around him wanted to sort of sweep it under the rug. So I do understand why he just said, look, we're going to adopt the IHRA in full, even though it was wrong to do. You know, hindsight is a wonderful thing. But at the time, we were gearing up for an election, and there was an election in 2017, which, by the way, Jeremy Corbyn got 40% of the vote. Just imagine what would have happened if everyone got behind Jeremy Corbyn. Maybe it was a majority. I mean, there was a poll a week later in the 2017 election, which showed Labour on course for a very small majority. So who knows? But, you know, we can't always dwell on the past. But that was that. So I kind of understand why he sort of capitulated there. This time it's different. And there are many different things. One, obviously, since the 7th of October, the anti-Semitism smears have almost dissipated because people, now ordinary people, right, who don't really follow these sorts of things every single day, now understand that if you have the smallest amount of criticism for Israel, you get labelled anti-Semite. Like, people who weren't politically involved before, wouldn't consider themselves left-wing, are like, oh, I'm not sure if Israel should be, you know, cutting off water and electricity. That seems like that might be illegal. And then you get lumped as an anti-Semite. So since the 7th of October, a lot of the smears just do not work anymore. Secondly, there is a real opportunity here with this new party that isn't burdened by the Labour Party with the undemocratic levers within inside the party, and also the very undemocratic or anti-democratic people within the party, like the Blairites and the Starmerites and the Morgan McSweeneys, who hate democracy, hate anything left-wing, pretty much hate everything. They're soulless people, right? They're not in this new party. So it is absolutely essential that no one bows down to the anti-Semitism smears, the bad faith actors who want to weaponize a real issue, something that still exists in today's society, to weaponize Jewish people's feelings and fears to smear a political opponent, which is disgusting. And this channel, you know, has always called out from its very first video 4.5 years ago. We called out the anti-Semitism smears. I'm very proud of that. And it doesn't have that issue potentially in this new party. So I think it's very encouraging to see Zarah Sultana say, I'm not falling for this shit anymore. And secondly, as we've seen historically, capitulating isn't a very good strategy. Now, the idea to capitulate, and obviously I was talking about Jeremy Corbyn there, doing it when he was Lotto, leader of the opposition, was that we'll just sweep it under the carpet and they'll shut the fuck up about it. But that implies that those on the other side are reasonable. That actually, they've got these specific concerns, and if you agree with them, they'll shut up. But they're not reasonable people. They're going to push, and then push. So when Jeremy Corbyn adopts the IHRA definitions in full, even though they were wrong, the detractors didn't say, okay, thank you, Jeremy, now we're going to get behind you. No, they found something else to smear Jeremy Corbyn with. You know, the people were saying, oh my God, he pronounced Epstein. He must hate Jewish people. Like, we had these examples. So these people are crazy. So capitulation doesn't work because you're capitulating to people who would never, ever will back down. And secondly, it makes you look weak and it makes you look wrong. I think what we've learned now is saying sorry in politics, excuse me, saying sorry in politics is very, very bad, right? This is something the right wing do very well. And I'm not saying we emulate the right wing in terms of them just constantly lying and being just soulless bastards, but they never apologize. When Trump says something that was patently incorrect and you know he's fucked up, he will not apologize. Because when you say sorry, you kind of put the ball in the court of the accuser by saying, okay, I accept your framing, I accept your rules. Fuck that shit. Don't do it, because these people aren't reasonable people. So if someone accuses you of being anti-Semitic, don't say, oh, maybe I was wrong here. Fuck that. Just say, we're not falling for it anymore. We're not going to allow you to fool the public anymore. You people don't care about anti-Semitism. In fact, Zionists, a lot of Zionists are the biggest anti-Semites I fucking know, right? They're doing it for just to smear your political opponents, and it's wrong. And Zarah Sultana is doing something which is absolutely 100% correct. Do not back down, and not only that, but call out the SMEARS, call out the weaponization and say, look at these people. These people do not care about anti-Semitism. If they did, they would actually speak to Jewish communities, not just Israel groups, right? There are many, the Jewish Voice for Labour, for example, an anti-Zionist group. They don't listen to them. They're the wrong sort of Jew in their eyes. So there's a lot of anti-Semitism within Zionism, which, once again, the Zionists and the pro-Israel people do not give a shit about. So the left need to do that. We need to never capitulate, don't back down, don't say sorry, and then call out the weaponizers.
So well said. And I think the whole capitulation thing, it has to be contextualized properly, because in a narrow sense, yes, Corbyn did. And I think that needs to be recognised to the IHRA definition. And you're so right when calling out the mishaps or the shortcomings of capitulation, because it does shift the centre ground further right. And I think by capitulating, you are legitimising the idea that criticism of Israel, is almost, suspicious or dangerous. And I think that's what happened in that. So, like, you'd given really, really great examples, but the IHRA examples kind of blurred the anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, and then by adopting them, Labour kind of reinforced that framing as well. So I think that kind of worked against the Labour Party back when Corbyn was there, and it also, like you said as well, narrowed the space, I think, for Palestinian solidarity, and that, I think, was the saddest part of it all, because what was once a mainstream left position suddenly became very risky or unsayable, and no one could really talk about it without being brandished as some sort of anti-Semite. So really great point. My final question then is, why do you think the establishment is so desperate to frame Sultana's words as anti-Semitic or as a betrayal of Corbyn, when in reality she's trying to double down on Corbyn's legacy?
Well, there are those within the mainstream media who have obviously always been opposed to people like Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana and the left-wing political project, right? I'm going to sort of not talk about the establishment in its sort of vague terms, because the establishment is hostile to the kind of policies that we support, like wealth redistribution, anti-colonialism, and ethical foreign policy. But I'm going to speak about specific people within the mainstream media. Within the mainstream media, the so-called journalists and the pundits have never treated the left as serious political actors. They've treated every other faction as serious. They've treated the right wing as serious. They've treated what they are, so-called centrists, as serious, but the left never as serious. And therefore, these people have always believed that the left are never allowed to govern. They believe that the type of politics we have, they should never be able to be in positions of power. So any chance they can make a dig, whether it is pretending that Zarah Sultana is having a go at Jeremy Corbyn when she wasn't, they're going to point that out. So it's the lack of intellectual curiosity within those in the mainstream media. Of course, not like 90% of those went to private school. These are out of touch, privileged people who do not want to see a mass working class rise, and they don't want to see the emancipation of the working class. When you're in a position of privilege, equality feels like your rights are being taken away. No one wants that. I mean, when you're in a position of privilege, it's nice, right? You have that privilege. You don't want other people having some of your pie. So any sort of policies to redistribute wealth and power to ordinary people, then the gatekeepers of that power, the media, absolutely despise that. So of course, they want to do it. And again, the reason why I want to sort of bring it more down to the person rather than the abstract of the establishment, because I think people understand that, is the fact that, once again, these journalists, they've never rubbed shoulders with people like Jeremy Corbyn. They've rubbed shoulders with conservatives and reform people and establishment figures within the Labour Party. They'll pretend they're like really aggressively against each other, and then they go to the same spectator parties. So they're all sort of in the same boat, right? They'll say, I'm a conservative, I disagree with this Labour figure. But, I mean, how much difference is there between the Conservative and Labour? Zero nowadays. But they all go to the same parties, right? Jeremy Corbyn and the left, completely left field, out of there. And this is like, well, we don't hang around with these people. We don't like these people. I like Tristram Hunt when he was once upon a time a Labour MP. I like Keir Starmer because he'll go to the same parties. Whatever. But Jeremy Corbyn, absolutely not. Finally, as well, there's a deep hatred for Corbyn in his politics, specifically against Corbyn, is because when he ran for leader, he held a big fat mirror up to these people. He showed people for who they were, and they did not like what they saw. So I think a lot of people hold a big grudge against Jeremy Corbyn simply for just offering a different kind of politics. But these corporate journalists and pundits were made to, once in their lives, feel uncomfortable because Jeremy Corbyn existed and said, we can do things a different way.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.